Hi, I'm Grant Bartley. Here I want to start to answer the question, what is reality under current ideas in physics and metaphysics, especially to do with quantum mechanics and how the mind and the brain relate? The mind-brain connection is metaphysically crucial. I mean, the interface between the mind and the brain is crucial to our understanding of the nature of reality. This is the front line of metaphysics because unless we understand how the content of our minds and the activity of our brains connect, as they demonstrably do, we can't say we begin to understand the nature of reality. The glaring part of the puzzle is left gaping at us. In any case, I'll argue that the first and most significant division of reality is between mind and matter, or as we might say, between conscious stuff and non-conscious stuff. They're totally and fundamentally different types of things. The brain is made of matter, and arguably energy, and the mind is made of experience and thought. How could they possibly connect, even? So to get a grip of the nature of reality, we'll consider in depth what body and mind actually are. And I do mean in depth. Psych yourself up for a fast descent through layers of reality. We'll start with the nature of matter, then consider major aspects of mind, before circling around to reappraise matter in the light of mind. We will take our bodies, and specifically our brains, to be physical in the same sort of way that every other physical thing in the universe is physical. But what way is that? In everyday language, for something to be physical means it has physical characteristics such as weight, or is solid and has a visible or perceivable physical structure. In short, physical things have physical properties. To have physical properties means that something acts or behaves in typically physical ways in interaction with other physical things. In other words, physical things change and interact with each other according to physical laws. We would add that for something to be physical means that it's made of physical stuff. Or in more philosophical jargony terms, physical things have a physical substance. Physical substance is whatever ultimately makes up the physical material world. Since something's substance, that is, what it's made of, is displayed through its properties, we know that physical substance is present through the display of physical properties. What does this mean in practice? First, it implies that physical things are made of matter and energy. However, even here the picture starts to get complicated, since technically speaking, in terms of a physicist's understanding, energy itself is not any sort of substance. It's no sort of thing or stuff. Rather, energy is the physical object's capacity to act, that is, to do something. In this sense, energy is dependent on the existence and operation of matter, in being a measurement of matter's changes. So what is matter then? What is the physical world made of? What is the substance of material reality? Many physicists currently think that the physical world is ultimately interacting fields of force. Our current scientific understanding is that, on a foundational subatomic level, for something to be physical means it's involved in a distinctive system of interactions between the quantum units we know as wave particles, such as electrons exchanging photons in atoms to create chemicals. En masse, these interactions between quanta enable the larger expression of physical structure, which gives us our everyday experience of the physical world. In our everyday experience, a variety of physical characteristics, such as solidity, shape, weight, or motion, are displayed to the observing perceiver. The subatomic world out of which our everyday physical world, including our brains, is built, breaks down into two basic types of thing: material wave particles or signaling wave particles. Thus, the physical world is matter quanta, sending and receiving force quanta signals and reacting accordingly. Physicists call the receiving and transmitting quanta fermions. They group together the force-carrying or signal quanta under the name bosons. The fermions are the bit of matter such as electrons that the force-carrying bosons, such as photons, impact. So this picture of the subatomic world is one in which physical forces act upon force-receptive matter fermions through an interchange of signal bosons. In this way, everything basic matter does is related to fields of force. And out of this display of force, the larger physical world is constructed. Different matter quanta have different properties and so are receptive to different messenger quanta, and so to the influence of different forces. The messenger quanta are the active expression of only their particular force, be it electromagnetism for photons, or the Higgs field for the Higgs boson, etc. And the resultant behavior is a particular expression of the forces that the signals are signaling about. The physics subdiscipline of quantum dynamics models how this constant signaling of bosons between fermions works. But this is the physical world as we scientifically understand it at its most fundamental level now. Importantly, however, this world of matter connected together and influencing each other through signal exchange is quantum mechanical in nature. And according to the most popular interpretation of quantum mechanical experimental results, the Copenhagen interpretation, this means that, at the quantum level, the physical world is a probabilistically evolving structure with the potential for being observed. What on earth does that mean? Quantum mechanics experimental results indicate that, when it's not being observed, matter exists not in any traditionally understood, continuing to exist sort of way. On quantum mechanics, outside of observation, there's no material substance as we might traditionally understand material substance to be. A good physicist would instead say that on a molecular level and below, individual or structures of quantum wave functions evolve probabilistically. To summarize the Copenhagen interpretation, we might say that at the quantum level of detail, physical structure is only determinately real insofar as it's experienced to be so. Otherwise, independent of such observation, the behavior of the physical constitutes of the universe is probabilistic or related to probability. In practice, probabilistic means we don't precisely know what a quantum entity will be seen to be or how it will behave until we see it. We can only give probabilities of it being observed to be in various states, such as its position or velocity or other quantumly affected details. So the Copenhagen idea says that, on a very small scale, unobserved physical reality consists of potential physical structures to potential observers and the forces that govern the changes in these potentially experienced structures. Observation turns this evolving potential structure into what we call reality, that is to say, into an entity with a variety of determinate physical features, such as a photon being observed to be in a particular place, or an electron to have certain momentum, etc. This is the quantum way that experience determines reality. It's curious to use words like possible, experienced, and mentally determined in the context of talking about the nature of the material world. Don't you agree? How do you make physical reality out of that? And what anyway is a physical object on this sort of understanding? What exists of matter when I'm not perceiving it, and of the bits which nobody's perceiving? Deep in the centre of the earth, say, or on the far side of a nebula. Indeed, how does the physical world exist even when we do perceive it? Because of their mass, everyday scale objects, which are made out of trillions upon trillions of quanta, do not behave in the quantum manner of the objects which compose them. So everyday scale objects are statistically unlikely to randomly transform far from being the state we know them to be in. Your book is much more likely to be on the table where you left it than for it to have quantumly teleported to the end of the garden, for instance. And quantum teleportation is how diodes work on your computer, so they must be real. In this sense, on the large everyday scale, physical objects are continually existent structures. Yet on a much higher resolution, these objects are trillions upon trillions of quantum interactions, which are, let's say, only vaguely defined. So on the everyday scale, we might say a physical object just sits around waiting to be perceived. Whereas on a quantum level of resolution, its parts are interacting with the quantum world in a more probabilistically defined manner and waiting for something to observe it. Meaning, make some of its possible interactions realized realities, and they're realized by being observed by an observing mind. This can happen, for example, through your retina absorbing photons being reflected from a surface, the electrochemical activity then occurring in your brain constructing the observational properties of that photon to you, the perceiver, and so also the perception of the object the photon illustrates, say a vase of flowers. But each object we perceive is made up of complex matrices of quantum probabilistic wave particles expressing fields of force and changing according to quantum laws. We could say that the everyday scale universe we experience encompasses the set of our quantum structural possibilities. But to put it as simply as I can, we might say that everyday physical objects are vaguely defined sets or structures of possible quantum interactions. The quantum change of all the quantum scale parts approximates on an everyday scale to the normal way objects are seen to exist and behave in our everyday experience of the physical world. The difference quantum mechanics makes to the being or nature of everyday scale physical objects such as apples or chairs is that, on a much higher resolution, insofar as the quantum scale behavior of objects is not being perceived or observed, there is no precise physical reality to them in normal terms. For most of the time, in everyday physical objects, quantum constituents are not being made real in observation, so the quanta do not have a well-defined physical reality. An everyday scale object, such as a vase of flowers, might have a vague definition according to the terms of your experience, but it has no substantial definition at a quantum scale. But we can say that a normal object remains real even when you have your back to it, in the sense that you can always potentially physically interact with that object, which has that shape. We might even say that a physical object's rough, large-scale shape continues to exist then. So one important metaphysical point to note here is that, when they're not being observed by us, everyday scale objects remain the same things by being the same roughly defined structures of possible quantum interactions. It gets even more complicated than this though, inevitably, since we only represent the world in our experience of it. We are never in direct contact with the physical world in our experience of it. Rather, we're in direct contact only with our sense-based model of the world constructed by our minds. So what is the reality of the physical world we represent in our experience? what's behind the appearance of the world to our minds through our senses. As Immanuel Kant insistently pointed out, all our sense perceptions of the world, all the sights, sounds, touches, etc. we have of the world, are only representations of it. We cannot know about the world beyond our perception just by perceiving it. What we can know about reality in itself beyond our perception, we must know intellectually then, as extrapolated from our representing experience of it. Kant thought we could know nothing about reality beyond our representation more than this, actually. But he was wrong about that. We can know a lot from experience about physical reality as it is in itself, such as it must have at least the level of detail of physical interconnectedness we experience it to have. Otherwise, how could the reality cause the level of detail we experience? Moreover, it must be connected together in the way physics will finally tell us it is connected together. Since the simplest way to explain the order of physical interconnections we experience the world to have is to say it has those interconnections. But our experience of the world showing us the order of the physical world's connections means that the form of the world as we experience it shows us the behavior of its real parts relative to one another. If our experience of the world didn't do that, it would be hard to say how our experience usefully informs us about the world at all. The rules governing the changing of physical forms are mathematically defined as the laws of physics. So this all means that the laws of physics are an understanding of the relationships of the behavior of things in the real physical world in itself. However, one thing we probably can't know from experience is what the stuff the world's made of is really like. What is it like to be a photon, etc.? We don't know the terms of matter's existence apart from what we can infer from what we can perceive of its behavior. Importantly, we don't know from our sensory and scientific representations of the world the nature of the substance of the quantum structures we represent. So we have a true model of the processes of physical reality mathematically defined according to the finest laws of physics, but our direct experience of physical reality is otherwise metaphysically uninformative. How can we best think of the physical world without presupposing anything about its fundamental nature apart from saying its observed behavior is its real behavior in some ways? We don't know anything about the real nature of the physical world yet other than it obeys the laws of physics as we've so far managed to pin them down. This means reality behaves in a quantum way. Quantum mechanics says that observation changes the behavior of a quantum entities from wavy to determined. Nevertheless, there must be some sense in which, in themselves, quantum physical objects are the same thing when we're observing them as when we're not. What sense is that? Well, we might say that a quantum entity is a fluctuating wave of the probability of observation of certain physical characteristics. And the difference for the observed quantum system is only that the probability of it being observed to be in the state it is observed in is 1. In other words, on observation we've moved from probability to knowledge, but the entity is still a quantumly probabilistic wave particle. In quantum terms then, it is rather as Bishop George Berkeley implausibly claimed. Physical objects are the continuing potential for perception of them. But this idea must be interpreted in a quantum and Kantian way rather than in an erroneous Berkeleyan way. This means that we should think of the physical universe as a probabilistic force signal exchange system which ultimately yields experiences to representing minds concerning the form of the system. The bits of the world we're connected with evolve in such a way that the large-scale results are this world. So we can also say the everyday physical world we experience is the realization of the order or structure of quantum probabilistic physical causal interactions represented in our experience. In fact, though, on the deepest level, far below our everyday understanding of material things, quantum mechanics does away altogether with material substance as it's traditionally understood from everyday experience, as a continuing to exist sort of thing with continuing exist substance. Instead, quantum mechanics describes physical reality in terms of laws for how changes in evolving possible physical interactions on a quantum level may be observed. This, I think it's fair to say, is a very different view of reality than most people's assumptions about it. That's what your body, including your brain, is, then. What about your mind? Why is your mind not part of your body? In particular, why is the mind not merely a physical expression of the physical brain? And if it's not, how then do we formulate the relation of the mind to the brain? I've discussed these questions elsewhere at length. Allow me to summarize my conclusions here. Or pause this and watch them first. The mind is defined as what has subjective experience. In brief, I'll equate mind with awareness and its contents. If there is something it's like to be you, you are a mind, because that means you're having experiences, and so awareness, at least to a degree. Mind can first be conceived in terms of experiences and experiencers. That is, in terms of the awareness and the contents of the awareness minds have. There may well be some high Buddhist state where one has awareness without content. Alternatively, for all I know, such an idea might contradict the very idea of awareness. Anyway, for all other purposes, awareness has content. Neuroscience tells us that our awareness and its content is somehow created, or maybe channeled, you might say, through electrical chemical activity in the brain's neurons and synapses. So, how does your awareness and its contents relate to the brain whose activity creates it, and in doing so creates you? To answer this, we first have to understand how the mind and brain relate in terms of their natures. Or as we might say, we must first see the conceptual or metaphysical difference between mind and matter. Is your mind your brain? No, of course it isn't. Well, why not? As I said, I'm using the definition that your mind is your awareness of all the experiences you have. In short, a mind is whatever has experience. Elaborating on this, a mind is what directly experiences sensations, thinks thoughts, entertains beliefs, and feels emotions, among other contents. The human mind and the human brain are intimately connected. Findings so far lead us to the working assumption that everything that happens in or to a person's mind has a detailed physical correlate in the activity of their brain. So what's the relationship between mind and brain? The mind is created by the brain, as I'd put it, but your mind is not your brain. Indeed, my mind is nothing like my brain, except in one key way. I'll get to the key to the mind-brain relationship soon. But first I want to demonstrate that your mind and your brain are not only different things, they're fundamentally different types of thing. We're taking the meaning or referent of the word mind to be the experiencer of conscious content. Someone jumping to conclusions might respond, well, what has experience is the brain, isn't it? Doesn't the brain create experiences? So isn't the brain the mind? Well, first, nothing creates itself. But also, are our experiences identical to the brain activity that creates them? No, in fact, they're nothing like them, as I said. To the same extent, then, brains are a completely different type of thing from the minds their activity creates. It's important to get a way of speaking about the nature of mind and brain, and of the mind's relationship to the brain correct, or at least going in the right direction, because if we misdescribe these foundation stones of metaphysics, we fundamentally misdescribe reality by establishing a foundation of thought in the wrong place at the wrong angle. This is precisely what materialism has done. It has established a fundamental error at the core of Western thought. Allow me then to argue that the only coherent way of speaking about the mind and the brain is to say that the mental and the material aspects are two different types of things. This will be a different argument to the one I present in my video, Why the Mind is Not the Brain. The working assumption of neuroscience is that the activity of the brain creates or channels all the elements of all the experiences and thoughts we experience and think, including the experiences and thoughts you're experiencing and thinking now. So, to understand how it's possible for you or for every other human or even slightly sentient creature to exist as a result of their nervous system's activities, this question arises. How does a brain create experiences and thoughts, and so minds, through its activities? This question and its variants is called the mind-body problem. Some philosophers deny that there is a mind-body problem. They might, for instance, say that the mind just is the brain in action. And they might justify this identification with the misleading statement that neuroscience has shown them to be the same thing. However, in particular, neuroscience hasn't shown us that the mind is a physical thing, only that the mind has been produced by a physical thing. But so what about that? What has been produced is not itself physical. First, we automatically make a distinction in our minds and reactions between our experiences and a world external to those experiences. I see the table, and even while I'm seeing it, I assume that my seeing of the table and the table that I'm seeing are distinct, that there is a separate real table that my experience of the table is an experience of. Or, I feel the coldness of the snow, and I assume the snow is the cause of my feeling the cold, but is distinct from the feeling itself. We both automatically and deliberately distinguish our sensational experiences from the causes of those experiences. All but the most committed solipsist must make a conceptual distinction between their experience of the world and the world they experience. If only from the inescapable fact that not everything we experience in the world behaves the way we would will it to. Much of what we experience changes or operates in ways completely independent of even our most powerful desires. Instead, things in our experience of the external world behave in idiosyncratic ways, not mentally controllable by us. If you don't believe that, watch the news. Perhaps this independence from the power of our own minds is what convinces us that at almost every moment of our experience, these things we collectively call the world exist external to our mind. The cause of our experience is external to our experiences. Philosophers call the world of everyday experience the external world, just because it's taken to be external to our minds. and it's taken to be external to our minds because of its independence from our mind's control. This is in contrast to our thoughts, for instance, whose flow we can control to a degree, and so which we know are in our minds. The story of the external world doesn't end here. We don't just experience random sensation after random sensation with no connection between one experience and the next. The external world is not a random carnival of phenomena, a chaotic cosmos of nonsensical, disordered sensations. The experiences we have of this world have a somewhat predictable manner of changing, rather, indicating that the world generating our experiences is to an extent ordered. For example, things move and change in regular ways. The ball bounces and we can follow its bounce with our eyes or mind. Or the cat pounces and we can follow its pounce. These mind-external objects also behave as if they continue to exist when we're not experiencing them. For example, the car disappears behind the bus, then quickly reappears. This gives us further reason to believe that the causes of these experiences are independent of our experience. Under further investigation, we find these objects have characteristic properties, such as solidity or weight, and taking up space in particular ways known as shape. Tables are table-shaped, and cats are cat-shaped, and so on. And unlike our own thoughts and imagining, these external world objects can be experienced by many people. This is precisely what is meant when it's said that the external world objects behave or exist in an objective way. Naturally, we have a category for the objects that behave in these characteristic external ways and which have these characteristic sorts of properties. We call them physical or material properties, and we call the objects which have them physical or material objects. Thus, the world we experience as external to and independent of our minds, but causing our experience in these distinct ways, we call the physical or material world. Notice, however, how we arrived at what physical means. We surmised from the character of our experiences that there is a world which exists independently of those experiences, which we would therefore say is external to our experiences and minds. Our experiences of the external world are that it behaves in regular ways and exhibits categorizable sets of characteristics, and we have called these ways and characteristics physical or material ways and characteristics. On this scheme, the brain is indubitably a physical object, isn't it? Having well-documented physical characteristics. It has a shape, meaning it takes up physical, that is to say, experienced external world, space, in a particular way. It also has weight, and so mass. And as a virtually solid object, your brain has a feelable texture and consistency. It's like porridge, apparently. Moreover, the brain behaves according to characteristically physical laws. Not only on the large scale, but significantly, our neurons display detailed physical behaviors, such as conveying electrical pulses along their lengths through the movement of ions, or shunting reactive chemicals from cell to cell. So the brain is clearly a physical object, having, as it does, characteristically physical properties. However, the mind-body problem is not the question, is the brain physical, but rather the question, how does the brain's activity relate to the mind it creates? Specifically, the question we're addressing now is, are our experiences physical things? And from what I've just said, the answer to this question is emphatically no. Minds are not physical things. What's more, minds cannot be physical things by definition. Rather, minds are mental and not physical in nature. Why does that follow? Reconsider what I just argued. We got our concept of the physical world by inferring from the nature of our experiences a world that causes these experiences and which is distinct from them. So what physical means is defined through its distinction from our mental contents. However, if what is meant by physical is defined as being distinct from experience, it cannot be coherent to say that experiences themselves are physical. How could experiences be defined in terms of being distinct from experience? They can't. You might think I'm equivocating. The physical world I experience is defined as being distinct from my experiences of it. Sure, you can follow that. Why should this mean that experiences themselves aren't physical? After all, we're not saying that our experiences are the physical things they're experiences of. Rather, the physical objects the experiences themselves would be some part of the electrical and chemical activity between experience-relevant neurons and synapses, plus X, to include any as yet unknown physical aspects. We all agree the brain is a physical object, so the brain can be defined in the same way as other physical objects, as having physical characteristics such as weight, solidity, etc. This applies on the neuronal and synaptic activity level too. The electrical and chemical activities going on in the brain at the interneuronal level display their own sets of physical properties. So, if we want to ask whether the mind itself is also physical, we might ask whether sensations and other experiences display physical properties themselves. And the answer is clearly no, they don't. Experiences themselves don't have physical properties, only mental ones. These are all the properties experiences have in being contents to aware minds, such as what it's like to see a certain shade of red or to understand an idea. These properties are nothing like physical properties such as weight. Indeed, mental properties sometimes contradict physical properties. For instance, physical things extend across physical space, while thoughts themselves do not extend across physical space. Awareness and its contents are unlike the brain activity that creates them to the point of not having any of the same properties, or even the same substance. Brain activity is made of matter and energy, but the mind is made of experience and thought. Experiences and thoughts exist exactly and only as they are experienced. So experience is the very substance of experience, since there's nothing else to it. We can add, mental contents exist only in minds. Since they display no physical properties, it cannot be the case that sensations and other experiences, and so the mind to which those experiences exist, are physical things. The very concept of physical is whatever displays physical properties and behaviors, whereas the very concept of mental is defined in opposition to that idea, as not displaying physical properties and behaviors, and so as having mental, that is, specifically non-physical, properties and behaviors. Indeed, if you take the distinctly mental properties away from experiences, you're left with nothing. The point is, our concept of mental is defined in opposition to the concept of physical. So the way we understand physical implies, as a logical necessity, that experiences are not identical to, but on the contrary, are necessarily distinct from the physical brain that creates them. Sensations and all other types of experiences you have are distinct from any physical thing, such as a brain, because they do not have any physical properties. By extension, the experiencing awareness is distinct from the brain too. So brains and minds must be different things. This argument can be summarized. Physical is not experiential. Experiential is mental. Therefore, not experiential means not mental. Therefore, physical, which is not experiential, is not mental. However, the brain is physical. Therefore, the brain is not mental. Therefore, my mind, is not my brain. QED. At its most basic, the argument is, physical things are not sensations. Therefore, sensations are not physical things. We can also say that other forms of experience, such as thoughts or emotions, are similarly not physical. Therefore, the mind is not physical, and in particular, the mind is not the brain. I challenge anyone who wants to assert the identity of the mind and the brain to give definitions of both experiences and physical objects in a way that shows that they are the same things. I claim you can't do it, since it's a logical contradiction to identify the mental and physical for the sorts of reasons I've just argued. I would add that making a distinction between the mental and the material worlds is actually a matter of comprehending the meaning of the words. Mental refers to things as they exist experientially, which means as entirely present in or to a mind, whereas material or physical involves the idea of things by definition not existing solely in or to our minds, instead having characteristically physical rather than mental properties and behaviours. So mental things exist to minds, whereas physical things exist outside of our minds. If physical things did exist entirely to minds, they would actually be mental things. To explore that idea would be diving off the deep end of metaphysics, so I'll save that till the end of the video. After noting their distinctive properties and behaviours, and so their distinctive natures, we need to put the mind and the brain in their distinctive places. The physical world, which has the characteristically physical properties and behaviours, is specifically external to or beyond the mind. So where do we put the mind if the physical world is defined as being outside it? A neuroscientist might say that the different aspects of mind are diversely physically located throughout the brain. This is a workable approximation, perhaps, but it is not an accurate way of phrasing the situation. Instead, strictly speaking, mind should not be considered physically located, since not only is it, strictly speaking, not physical, it is not in the physical world. Rather, we should see minds as interacting with the physical world at or through brains, but not actually as existing in physical space. Instead of saying that the mind exists in physical space, we should say minds exist in mental space. So, the mental space of your mind interacts with the physical space of your brain. Not only through brain activity creating mental contents, but with free will causing brain states, as I'll soon elaborate. The activity which embodies the information informing the mind exists in physical space, in the brain activity, but the mind so informed is in mental space. The mind being in mental space means that, strictly speaking, the mind is not in the brain at all. Even in the linked mind-brain system, the physical aspect does not exist in the mind, nor mind in physical space. The brain activity is not part of the experience, nor vice versa. If the brain were in the mind, the brain would be to that extent mental and not physical. So we should draw strict boundaries. Everything in the mind is in the mind, and so exists mentally, that is, as experience, in mental space. and everything physical exists external to our minds in physical space where our minds do not exist. Not only are our mental contents absolutely different from the physical objects they represent, the causal laws will work differently in the mental and physical realms too, no doubt. Yet the mind in mental space is evidently connected to the physical substrate, the electrochemical activity in the brain. So how do the mind and the brain interact? How, for instance, does the activity in your brain create your mind's contents? Or, going in the other direction, how do the choices and decisions you make with your mind, otherwise known as free will, set your brain activity to tell your body to move in the way you want, including speaking? The first half of the basic problems with the mind's and the brain's relationship is: how does physical electrical activity between neurons and synapses in your brain create your experiences of the world and your thoughts? The second of the symmetrical pair of mind-brain problems is: how does your mind recreate your brain in choice? I have videos addressing both of these topics, so allow me here to simply summarize conclusions I have argued for elsewhere. Ultimately, I think that the relationship between neuronal activity and mental contents is that the information in the brain's activity is the information in the mental contents. Information in the brain and mind can be thought of as information for both physical and mental categories simultaneously. In other words, it's the same information in two distinct media: brain activity and experience. You could also say that what we see physically happening in the brain is our representation of the information from the physical point of view, whereas our experience presents the same information from a mental point of view. In a sense, the mind and brain can communicate because it's the same information applied to two different spaces, from physical space to mental space and back again. The neuronal activity embodying the information exists as part of the physical world, yet this specific configuration of activity also has meaning in the mental world, and this meaning is the experiences themselves. Or, putting the same idea more formally, the physical instantiation of the information in the logic of the neuronal and intersynaptic electrical activity, almost certainly plus some yet unknown physical factors, is, in mental space, automatically translated as information that creates our experiences, because that's what this information is in mental space terms. It's information for experiences. We might call this the information equivalence solution to the mind-body problem. This relationship between the mind and brain might equally be called cross-causal mapping or dual space connectedness. The formal solution to the mind-body problem of both parts, then, is that the connection between the mind and the brain is a simultaneous realization of a pattern of information in both mental and physical systems. As a shorthand, we can say that the pattern of the mind state is the pattern of the brain state. The pattern depends on two causal systems, since for us experiencers, the mental depends on the physical. We can also call the idea that the information in the brain state is equivalent to the information in the mind state the mind-brain equivalence hypothesis. There's information in the brain's activity equivalent to the information in the experience it generates. In this sense, we have two different languages in two different media, expressing the same information: the language of physical code in the brain and the language of experience, which I've argued is some sort of automatic natural interpretation in mental space of the brain activity as having the mental meaning it has. going in both directions for both the creation of the mind by the brain and the recreation of the brain by the mind in choice. My mind-brain connection theory is that mind and brain connect together because there's encoding of information from the physical realm to the mental in experience creation, and decoding of information from the mental to the physical in free will. One metaphysical principle necessary for this to happen is clearly that the activity of our brains in physical space has meaning in mental space as experience. Basically, the brain and the mind connect because the information manifesting in physical activity in our brains simultaneously manifests in experiences in our minds. This is the basic sense in which experience and thought can be a natural result of brain processes. I call this position on the mind-brain relationship a naturalistic dualism rather than a materialism, because thoughts and experiences are not like the matter and energy of the brain, apart from sharing the same information. Matter is physical space-filling and physically forceful, while mind and its contents are purely experiential. The first part of the mind-body problem is, how does brain activity create your mind? In broad terms, the answer is, the brain is a coding machine for generating contents of consciousness. Code in physical space, embodied in intersynaptic electrochemical activity, is simultaneously experienced in mental space as the information in mental contents. Contents of consciousness are our sensations, understanding of language, and all the other aspects of our experience. So the information in experience includes information concerning what sensations are being had, or what language-based thoughts are being considered, for instance. So the information in experience concerns experience's quality, structure, semantic or verbal meaning, and whatever else makes up that particular experience. All this information is encoded in brain activity. Thus, the code for experiences in mental space is embodied in physical space in the relevant brain activity. I think this happens because the physical information in the brain activity has meaning in mental space, and the meaning is precisely the experience content. I think it's a necessary condition for the embodiment of experience that the body involved physically encodes information in a way that has meaning in mental space. How it might do so is a thorny problem. My present theorem of the brain's generation of sensations, for instance, such as the taste of sugar or the grey of the sky, is that neuronal activity code specifies a sensation in terms of its abstract, natural, logical relation to other sensations. By brain activity physically manifesting this code, meaning is also manifest in mental space, and so the sensation itself is realized in your experience. I've argued elsewhere that free will is conscious choice, and will assume the conclusion that your conscious willing is primarily your choice of your next mental contents. This new thought may subsequently affect the external world through our bodies if it's a choice to act. But strictly speaking, our wills only operate directly in the medium of our consciousness. Speaking precisely, the only thing our will operates directly on is our thoughts. Conscious will is an act by conscious thought upon conscious contents. One way of seeing this is by first seeing that, by definition, willing is an act of conscious decision. Therefore, by definition, will must immediately act only as and in conscious thought. For us embodied being, any change in thought also means a change in our brain states, and from then on, our choice has power in the external world via the operation of intermediary aspects such as bodily movements or speaking. The change in mind state causes a change in brain state, which causes nerve cells to send chemical electrical signals down the spinal column and into the muscles of the hand, twitching a thumb. The thumb thus presses a bright red button, which causes a bomb hatch to open and a bomb to fall. There's clearly a sense in which the willing mind didn't directly cause all this action and activity, but only indirectly. But not much physical reality is most directly under the influence of our wills. Only certain molecular behavior in our brains, indeed. Indeed, once the work of choice has been done mentally, this simultaneously specifying a certain set of synaptic activities, the causal chain becomes purely physical cause and effect from then on, even while still in the brain. It's the more exacting sense of will we're talking about here, though, the power of mind to affect its mental contents. People make choices in or through their minds, so choice is a faculty of mind. Free will is a mental power, we can say. So how does human free will work? Specifically, how could a choice of mind affect a brain? The choosing of the initial mental contents of the choice involves setting the electrochemical activity between specific neurons and synapses so that the mental contents of the choice are embedded in our brain activity as memory traces. In other words, the choice you make in your mind has to also simultaneously make the neurons and synapses fire in your brain that embody the mental contents involved. How could that possibly happen? I say this could happen through indirect quantum observation. I call the idea in neuroscience that everything that happens in your mind is precisely correlated with activities in your brain, the mind-brain connection assumption. So conscious willing also has neurocorrelates, right? Because willing is an exercise of mind. These direct brain correlates of conscious choice would be where the human mind is directly influenced by and influences the physical world back in choice. I think that information encoded in neuronal activity is what enables conscious choice to be affected into the physical world. As I said, experiences are created through neural activity when information in physical space operates in mental space to inform mental contents. So the neuronal activity can be recreated through choice if information choice in mental space also operates as information specification in physical space, that is, in the brain activity. I argue in How Free Will Happens Through the Brain that specifying activity in neurons and synapses throughout the brain, and so choosing the right brain activity, might be achieved through the contents of the mind being an indirect observation of the contents of the brain. The information in any experience, including an experience of choosing, is so precisely correlated with the information embodied in neuronal activity that if you know the one, you can specify the other. If you had equipment sophisticated enough to match them up, you could tell the mental contents from the brain activity, or the brain activity from the mental contents. But this precise correlation means that each thought can be an indirect representation of the precise brain activity it's associated with. In this way, each choice made by a brain-embodied mind like ours can be an indirect observation of certain neuronal activity associated with that choice. If we focus on the molecular behavior in neurons and synapses in the associated brain states, then this can be an indirect quantum observation. Molecular activity is quantumly specifiable through observation, and so choice is possible through the brain, by the choice of mental contents also being an indirect quantum observation of the behavior of molecules throughout the brain, which set the brain state correlated with those mental contents. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's at least potentially capable of explaining free will through the brain. It seems fair to imagine that the brain activity directly contributing information to conscious awareness in choice is where conscious will begins to operate in the physical world. The neuronal and synaptic activity for each of the capacities of the conscious mind used when we choose will be spread throughout the brain, various areas dealing with various aspects of consciousness. Even for a mere murmur of deliberation, there will be millions of neuronal and billions of synaptic activities involved, especially since choice involves many aspects of consciousness, including sensations, emotions, language, and reasoning. I look in more detail at these aspects of thought and how free will happens through the brain, so do watch that if you want more about all this. The closest the brain gets to being like a computer is that the brain creates a code that creates experience. This creation of experience through brain activity embodies all the information in all the experience of a choice a person makes. A mind's choice of contents, which is simultaneously an indirect choice of a brain state, must be made independently of the brain states chosen. Clearly, how can it choose what it already is? In any case, a choice is made in mental space, which means outside the physical interaction of the physical stuff. By the same reasoning, a choice must also be independent of the mental contents through which the choice is made. This implies that the chooser who makes the choice of the contents of mind is always situated outside the contents of the mind. Therefore, choice is somewhat mentally transcendent too, which was originally one of Kant's arguments, I think. For example, suppose I choose to pick up my phone. For this to be choice, first it has to be made in my mind independent of the physical behavior of my brain activity. But the choice also has to be made independent of reasons and other experiences informing my choice. Otherwise it's mental determinism, not personal choice. This means conscious choice happens in an aspect of mental space distinct from the realm of the mental contents themselves. I'll call this spiritual space, since what I take is meant by spirit is a choosing mind. Or you can think of it as personal space if the word spirit seems too religious to you. Now I can't fathom whether full choice is possible without self-awareness. Without self-awareness in choosing, maybe there would instead be only instinctive or otherwise automatic determination between different mental options. Maybe dogs and cats have a glimmer of free will. If self-awareness is necessary for true choice, then the zone of personal rational choice may be the zone of awareness of abstract concepts such as self, since these abstract concepts also involve an abstraction from experience. And of course, it gets even more complicated. We might say that someone makes rational choices from a perspective of rational understanding. Understanding happens a level above what's being understood, or perhaps a level below is a better way of putting it. But also, as I said, the choice operates outside the options it understands. Perhaps then we choose from a part of mental space a dimension higher than where the contents of even the most abstract understanding exist, such as an understanding of self. Let's agree that the space of choice is outside the space of the mental content involved in the choice. As said, the realm of mental space where rational choice happens I call spiritual space, since to me a spirit is a being with a mind, will and understanding, such as us. So I define spiritual space as the part of mental space where personal choice is made on the basis of rational understanding, beyond the conscious experience of what's being rationally chosen from. Or as I might say, it's a dimension of mental space whose access is tangential to the dimension containing the awareness of linguistic meaning and rational thinking. There may well be physical competition in the brain concerning which elements of thought emerge and survive in consciousness. However, for your choice and so your mind and will to be free requires only that they make a choice for this element of thought or that. So even if everything else were determined, if at the moment of choice I make my choice freely, then I have free will. If our thoughts' neural correlates are basically sets of molecules in synapses and neurons whose behavior is specified by choice through indirect quantum observation, then our choice of mental contents is effectively our mind quantumly choosing to move into one pattern of neuronal activity rather than another, on a molecular level throughout the brain. If you want to get really quantumly metaphysical here, one implication of this might be that a choice of a mind causes that mind to enter the quantum timeline of the particular brain state which correlates with the mind state chosen. Each choice we make specifies which precise physical universe our mind enters into. In other words, in choosing what to think, we choose the states of our brains, and in doing this we're deciding which precise physical worlds our minds are subsequently being correlated with brain-wise. In this way, mental freedom would be compatible with physical determinism, but not in the usual way that determinists think about it. I'm not sure this idea really follows, but it's a cool possibility. A mind state is equivalent to a brain state, specifically in the information equivalence. However, we certainly should not say that the mind is identical to the brain, since it's clearly not in any other way. As I mentioned, matter and mind have not only different types of properties, but to an extent contradictory properties. Matter is taken to be experientially independent, whereas mental contents are by definition experientially dependent. Or, as René Descartes noted in the 17th century, matter is physically extended, it takes up physical space, whereas mind is not physically extended. So we can say a mind state and its associated brain states are nothing like each other. That's about as far from them being the same thing as they can be. The distinct mental and physical aspects of reality means that the mind's link with the brain is the linking of two substances. Technically put, a substance is a fundamental category of a way to exist. This implies that a substance cannot be explained or described in terms of another substance. So it is with matter and mind. Referring to our earlier definitions of physical as part of a world external to experience, this straightaway means that physical and experiential are by definition mutually exclusive categories of being, that is, two different types of substance. So in these terms, by which I mean only till the end of the video in fact, I'm promoting what might be called a type of substance dualism. However, this is most emphatically not Cartesian dualism. For Descartes, dualism meant distinguishing souls from bodies, but I don't want to talk in vague soul terms right now. Rather, I want us to distinguish the substance of mental contents from the substance of physical things. The substance of physical things is matter, whatever that turns out to be. But the substance of any experience is the experience itself. The substance of any sensation, such as an experience of the colour yellow, is the sensation as experienced. Or the substance of the experience of language is the experienced meaning plus the sensations of the word signs used. Thus, the physical world is composed of wave particles, energy and forces, while the mental world is composed of experiences being experienced. And these two types exist in physical space and mental space respectively. So you might call this provisional metaphysical position an experience matter-substance dualism. This nicely emphasizes that there are two distinct types of stuff that make up reality. The mind-body problem is the problem of how these distinct types of stuff connect, as they evidently do. And as you now know, my answer is that experiences are experienced when physical brain activities create codes which have meaning in mental space. In other words, when brain activity is arranged the right way, whatever the right way turns out to be, we get experiences, and so experiencers. In other words, still, reality is such that, just by existing, the correct brain state produces minds with contents. Just by existing, your brain states continually create you. So the code or information in your brain that simultaneously constructs your immediate experience is surely the ultimate substance of you at each moment. As a substance, you are the information encoded in your mind and brain. As a person, you are the expression of your mind's information. Neuroscience has established that our minds emerge from activities across many areas of the brain, which is compartmentalized in its functions to highly specific degrees. There are specific sets of neurons that respond to the corners of objects in a visual field, for instance. I'd happily say that the information specifying the mind's contents is spread throughout the brain. But this spreading of information across the brain may to you seem to contradict your experience of having unitary or united mind. This problem is sometimes called the binding problem. What makes all this disparate brain activity into a single experiencing you? The mind can be made unitary from the physical disparate activity of the brain for two reasons I can think of. The first is that the separate brain activities are coordinated together by pulses sent around the brain. The second is that the information encoded in the brain's activity has experiential meaning in mental space, not in physical space anyway. Mental space is not physical space, so it makes no difference how physically separate the embodiment of this information is in the brain. Why should it? The meaning of the information is in mental space, not in physical space, after all. Moreover, what we're meaning by mind is an awareness with content. So I would say with Immanuel Kant that unitary awareness is necessary for there to be mind. If so, it's perhaps unsurprising that a unitary mind is what you get if you work the right pieces of information together the way the brain evidently does to produce experiential meaning. How the brain activities connect up to produce the mind's contents is one useful way of thinking about how the mind itself connects up together. In other words, the map of the connections of the mind through the brain, neuroscience is still working on drawing up, provides some sort of topological map of the mind's interconnections with itself in mental space. This is something neuropsychologists have been saying since neuroscience began. It's interesting that what we see of the brain is the appearance of the brain as part of our representation of the external world, mediated to our brains, then minds, through our sense mechanisms. So the appearance of the brain to us either by our unaided senses or through sensations boosted through scientific instruments, is part of the appearance of the world for us as constructed for our minds. This means we don't perceive how the brain really is in itself, that is, how the brain exists independent of our means of perceiving it. And truth is a question of what's really going on beyond any mere appearances. This means that the mind-body problem is not the problem of how our experiences connects with the brain as it appears to us through our means of representing it. Rather, the mind-body problem is a problem of how the internal world of the mind connects with the part of the external world we call the brain as it really is, which is not as we represent it as being. However, I mention this only in passing now. Some considerations I'll suggest soon might help us with brain's reality. Let's sort reality out a little. I want to draw your attention to 8 levels or categories of being, or 8 ontological layers of reality if you want to get jargony about it. Plus X, of course, because there's always more to be discovered. Going outwards from human experience, the 8 distinct key metaphysical aspects of reality are: 1. Experience. I start with experience because that's where reality starts for conscious beings. Everything we know through experience, so experience is first. What then is the nature of experience? As I say, by definition really, there's nothing to an experience beyond the experience itself. This means there's nothing to any experience except what it's like to experience it. So, the reality of any experience is the experience as it's experienced. In other words, as I say, the real substance of all experience is the experience itself. We're saying now that what we call the contents of experience to any mind display to the experiencer everything that makes up the experience, and there's nothing to the experience except that. Experience might be initially subcategorized into experiences of an external physical world and the products of the power of imagination and fantasy. We can further subdivide external world experiences into sensation types, including, I think, types of feeling, that is, emotional reactions to the world. Substance of any sensation is that sensation. Or we could focus on different types of creative thought. This includes rationalizing using language, which is colloquially called thinking. Mental creativity not using in a herd or otherwise selfishly experienced words, but using only visualized content is called imagining. 2. The experiencer of the experiences. I think you can't have experiences without an experiencer of them, but that the two concepts are nevertheless different concepts. Perhaps recognizing ourselves as experiencing minds is the second thing we become aware of, right after the awareness of just having experience. Indeed, experiencer and the experiences considered together is what I'm calling mind, awareness, or consciousness. 3. Will. I define will as the power of a mind to change its own contents. But it's conceptually distinct from both experiences and experiencers, so will is a different fundamental aspect of reality. Embodied in a world that isn't just your own mental contents, your power to change your mind has a wider application. I've argued that through indirect quantum observation, a willful change in mental contents can simultaneously be a specification of physical states, in particular the brain activity through which the mind is embodied. So you can will to move your body or alter the world through speech or action. I define a spirit as a mind with will and memory acting together. So the part of mental space in which will, aka conscious choice, acts, I've labelled spiritual space, or if you prefer, personal space. 4. The appearance of the physical world. This can be thought of as the sum of all the sensory experiences of the physical world to embodied creatures like ourselves, plus what we immediately conclude or feel about the world from these experiences. Kant called the world of appearance the phenomenal world, since phenomenal is Greek for things of the senses. I think it might be a distinct level of reality, so it gets its own ontological category. It at least deserves an honourable mention in the list of levels of reality, right? The first thing to note is that what the physical world looks and otherwise senses like to us is not what the physical world is like independent of how it looks and senses like to us. To put it briefly, all sensations are aspects of our experience of the physical world, that is, of the appearance of the world to us, not of the physical world as it is in itself beyond our experiences of it. So how could our experience independent reality be just like its appearance to us through our senses? An unsensed object cannot have any of all the colours, tastes, smells, textures and sounds that we experience objects to have. Nevertheless, the world having an appearance to us as the physical world we experience through our senses means we can work out various things about the nature of the physical world beyond this experience or representation of it. So 5. Classical physical reality. Our experience of the world presents what we can call classical physical reality to us, meaning our experience represents the external universe above the quantum level. I call this the larger scale level of reality. Here the physical world can be thought of as behaving in so-called normal terms. Our experiences of the world are, as we might say, rough approximation of the real external physical structures built up through innumerable quantum interactions. We construct our understanding of the shapes and behaviours of normal physical objects from these merely approximating experiences of them. But larger scale physical objects' real existence is as vague as how they are defined by our sensory experiences. The smaller scale at which the larger scale normal object behaviour concept have meaning is perhaps above the molecular. The normal classical physical object behaviour experience is not the most accurate way of representing physical reality, and should be thought of more as a rough sketch of the physical world, which is more accurately quantum in nature. And so, 6. Quantum level physical reality. This is the level or scale of physical reality at which distinctly quantum behaviour starts to become significant. The quantum level is the level at which we can begin to accurately describe the behaviour of physical things, and so the level at which we can infer that this is the actual behaviour of physical reality as it is in itself. Surprisingly, the observed behaviour, and so the inferred true nature of physical reality, is related to the determination of possible physical states through observation. So for quantum mechanics, the real or somewhat determinate existence of the physical world is relative to observing minds. In significant ways, unobserved quantum reality is different from observed quantum reality entirely. In a Copenhagen interpretation way, I say that what exists of the physical world outside of finite observation is quantumly probabilistically evolving structures with the potential for information about their physical structure being observed. This evolving potential structure does not continue to exist in any classically misunderstood material substance way. There's no such material substance outside of observation. There's only the quantum evolution through time and physical space of potential physical structures to potential experiences, and the laws governing this evolution. Combining the unobserved and observed phases of quantum physical reality together, we can say that wave functions of possible observations of structure evolve probabilistically, and observation collapses the possible to actual observation, turning quantum quasi-possibilities into a reality whose existence is observed by mind. Make what sense of that you can. Luckily, as I say, our rough, normal understanding of physical reality isn't like this at all. I follow Kant in calling physical reality as it really is, noumenal reality, the world that can only be known by the intellect, in contrast to its appearance or phenomenal reality. However, I'm not sure that Kant would want to limit his noumenal realm to physical reality. He would, I believe, also rope in whatever else exists in reality in itself, beyond its appearance to us through our senses. 7. Abstract and eternal truths. This level or zone of reality is wherever eternal conceptual truths, such as Pythagoras' theorem, or the truth that 2 + 2 = 4 exist. I think that even if the physical universe never existed, it would still be true that 2 + 2 = 4, and so on for other logical truths. This realm of eternal truth may be the same space as where the truth of all abstract or conceptual truths exists. I have little idea, Platonic pun intended, how conceptual truth exists, except to say that concepts exist defined by or to a mind. For eternal truths, then, logically speaking, this would mean the mind of God. See my video on the cosmological argument for some interesting consequences of this. 8. God. It seems plausible to me that the Creator requires his own category of being. He is the first creative spirit and the ground of all truth, after all. Plus X, because there will always be more layers to discover. On Sir Karl Popper's 3 worlds scheme of reality, his world 1 is the world of physical objects. I understand this to be some combination of my 4, 5 and 6. Popper's world 2 is the world of the mind. Popper's world 3 is my realm of abstract truths. We know from experience that reality includes experiences and experiencers. The fact of experience also requires that time exists, since time is necessary for experience to have duration, which it undeniably does. Our experience also requires the existence of whatever other categories of stuff are necessary for our experiences to be experienced the way they're experienced. This includes all the things external to our experiences necessary for them to be ordered in the way they're experienced to be ordered. The fact that the physical world behaves quantum mechanically has profound implications. Indeed, quantum mechanics provides a very different view of the nature of reality than most everyday assumptions about it. Instead, quantum mechanics describes the physical world in terms of laws for changes in how certain possible physical interactions may be observed. In other words, matter's existence and behavior are not independent of observation. So what? So in this way, we can understand all of physical reality with reference to minds. Being a Christian, I want to interpret this metaphysical earthquake in Christian terms. Basic Christian, or indeed Abrahamic, premises about God include the ideas that He is the all-powerful personal creator of everything, and that He knows everything too. Following our earlier definition of will as the immediate creative power of the mind, I want to say that when it's claimed that God creates and sustains the universe by His will, this must primarily mean He does so by His will directly. That is, as a direct application of deliberate, conscious creativity. Anything else, I think, would truncate God's role as the creator of the universe. So, what He consciously creates exists in His mind. And He consciously creates matter. Moreover, if He knows everything, this must be true about the physical world too, down to its finest detail. So, if you accept the basic Abrahamic understanding concerning God's omniscience and His creative omnipotence, the straightforward conclusion is that everything that exists primarily in the mind of God, and so is ultimately mental in its substance. It is, however, an interesting question what everything being in the mind of God turns out to imply, particularly for a quantum-type physical world. First, it means we're talking in terms of two-tier mind-constituted reality. God's contents and our contents. So we ought to talk about the experiential contents which together form the substance of the world for both finite mental and for physical aspects of the world. One aspect is the contents of finite, non-absolute minds, and the minds that go with these contents. Minds like mine, yours, or your pet cats, angels and demons, but also the direct contents of the mind of God that make up the real external reality, as well as there being God experiencing it all. So not only is there the distinct existence of the internal worlds of the contents of the finite minds of humans and other creatures, which of course is mental in nature because it's contents of mind. We must recognize the external physical world is actually also mental in its real nature, in terms, first, of existing in the mind of God from a subatomic level upwards. So let's consider the mental contents of the mind of God which I'm arguing external physical reality consists in. What is the nature of physical reality? At the beginning, we saw that the physical activity quantum physics describes is basically that fermions, or what we call matter quanta, exchange bosons or signal quanta. And this continued exchange of signals between matter quanta sets up fields of force through which the structure of physical reality is created. This quantum signaling evolution happens in relation to minds, since quantum mechanics, such as Schrödinger's wave equations, models the physical world in terms of the development of possible observations of physical reality. This means we already define physical reality in mental terms. Using a signal processing framework for understanding physical interactions at the most fundamental level means we can define physical reality in purely mental terms in another way too, as information processing. Specifically, I think of the exchanges as quantum information processing systems in operation. Here, the fermions, such as protons or electrons, are nodes for processing the information which is carried in the quantum signals they receive or give out, and react to accordingly. Matter interacting with signals from other matter can be seen as the processing of quantum information about states of matter. The information contained, say in a photon of a given energy or speed, is information about the surrounding physical environment or structure or behavior. and the signal conveys how the receiving electron should physically respond to this information, say by moving a certain way. We keep normal, everyday physical reality just because it emerges from these quantum information processes in the sort of complex manner the physical sciences have no doubt only just begun to trace out. The results of this process we then represent as our experience of physical reality. The physical world as we experience it to be really exists then. I'm adding that this information exchange perspective is how the ultimate substance of physical reality can be mental, not physical, since ultimately physical reality is quantum information exchange system being experienced and calculated in the mind of God. On top of that, there's our limited experiences too. As I say, I call this position a two-tier idealism, meaning that reality is ultimately mental contents in two completely different ways. The two tiers are finite and divine internal realities. First, we have God creating and comprehending the quantum information processes that make up the physical universe. The larger physical world emerges through the interaction of these processes in the way that physics says it does. One important thing our useful representation of physical reality means is that from looking at how reality appears to behave, we can know the real order of the causal interconnections in physical reality. The structure of physical reality remains what we observe, or if you prefer, what our experience models it as. This means the material world is ultimately mental in nature, in the mind of God, while still having all the physical characteristics our best scientific models observe the world to have. However, the nature of the stuff having the physical structure we represent the quantum interactions as creating is not experienced in our representation. But all finite sensory representations of the results of these processes are also real, right? Your experience is real, and these give us the phenomenal world. I would add that finite thoughts and other imaginings are also part of reality on this second tier. I believe the theologian Keith Ward has a similar two-tier view. This conclusion also bears some superficial similarities to some of the ideal bishop's views. The popular misinterpretation of Berkeley assumes that he thinks that objects only exist when they're being perceived by humans or other finite creatures. I don't think that at all, but neither did Berkeley. Berkeley knows that would make no sense. What would tie all the multiple experiences together in the orderly fashion the world presents itself in? So, Berkeley also relies on God perceiving everything. And this does yield an objectively existing external world, even if its substance is ultimately for it to be perceived by God or by us. To both me and the good bishop, the universe would still have existed even if no man, woman or beast had ever been alive to perceive it. However, there were crucial differences between Berkeley and Berkeley. As I understand him, Berkeley thought that God's experiences of the world were like our sensations of it, only infinitely more complex and much, much sharper. I don't think that at all about how God creatively experiences the world in the quantum way I've been talking about. In the current context, I take God's creative experience of the physical world to be nothing like our experience of it in our representation of it, but rather like whatever a direct experience of the quantum dynamics of subatomic physical quantum information exchange would be like, in a purely informational terms. We don't know what it's like for the quantum level physical universe to exist in the mind of God in such a way that this is how we observe a world built out of these quantum information processes. Well, whatever this is physical reality known in the mind of God, and so ultimate physical reality. But even a materialist should recognize that we do not know the real inner nature of the matter or signal quantum wave particles, only their behavior. As a specifically Christian theist, for me, God creates the universe by speaking His word. Presently, this seems to me to mean God creating the physical world by expressing the quantum system by which the physical world is constructed. But one might ask, what is God's experience of the intricate, intimate physical universe as He's creating it through speaking His word? A difficult question for sure, but until we know the answer to it, we cannot know what the real nature of the physical world is in itself. So what is in the mind of God, which is the information processing system, which is the real quantum world, which activity provides the foundation for the physical reality we interact with? Whatever it is, this is what physical reality really is. The only comparison we have with God's experiences are our own experiences. Unfortunately, we have a very limited toolbox of experience with which to attempt to understand God's experience in creating the quantum universe. It's like climbing a mountain with a penknife. What does this make reality though? How should we now understand it? First, there's God. God is a spirit, which specifically and definitionally means that He's a mind with a memory and character and a creative will. The term spirit means a being who consciously acts through an experiencing mind. That is to say, spirits make choices on the basis of what they experience, their characters, and their memories. I'm saying this one specific creative mind created physical reality and everything else in it. We define minds as awarenesses with contents, and spirits are minds with wills and hearts, that is, memories and characters. This also makes them personal, by the way. There are also the finite minds in which finite experiences happen. Minds such as yours or mine, or the angels or the hedgehogs. Some of these minds are spirits, but probably not all, as not all animals have free will, for example. Free will seems to require at least some degree of abstract thought in order to know itself as distinct from the contents of mind it must choose between. And I'm not convinced a mouse, for instance, could be said to have a useful degree of abstract thought. Next, there's quantum scale physical reality. I think about physical reality as a matrix of quantum information processing in the mind of God in the way we've just examined. And this matrix produces larger scale or emergent physical structure. This structure we represent in our everyday experience as the phenomenal physical world. Since our experiences of reality change in an ordered fashion, there must also be the laws or the causes of the laws by which the potential quantum states observed evolve. The laws of physics as well as the laws of logic and whatever other types of eternal truths there are. We might like to add the rules of information exchange also have some sort of existence in their own right. So experience in general, and quantum mechanics in particular, can be interpreted to say that what exists are aware creative minds or spirits, their experiences, and whatever makes the experiences what they are. What exists is experiences, the possibilities of experience, real experiences, and the possibilities, including the realities of the connection between the experiences, as observed in the minds of finite creatures and somehow in the mind of God. This world is ultimately information processing experience in the mind of God and mere possibilities otherwise. Your brain and awareness is an outcome of the connected behavior of this physical information processing system. There are different possible worlds too in the mind of God, I believe, as well as he knows how many different actual worlds he creates beyond this one. We exist in one of the possible physical worlds, which actually means one of the internally coherent possible physical causal systems. Then we come along in our place in all that's physically possible, and certain patterns in the connections between quanta are realized through our brain states, having meaning in mental space as the experiences we have. But the brain quanta through whose activity information is encoded for your mind are themselves information processing nodes and signals in God's mind. So what's being processed, both in our minds and in the mind of God, in different ways, clearly, is the information properties of certain wave particles acting together in our brains. Among many things, this means that the contents of the human mind are continuous with the activity of the human brain and the rest of the physical world and other internal worlds, in the sense that all are mental in nature. It's all mental content to mental content. Brain and mind are also continuous in the sense that the information in the experience is the information in the brain activity creating the experience. In these senses, your internal world is naturally metaphysically compatible with the external world. Take choice, for example. Here there's a continuous chain of mental cause and effect from the internal world of our mind to the objective, real, external physical world outside, from mind to brain, then all points beyond. But all these points outside your mind have their reality in the mind of God, and in other minds too. Choices are made in the area of mental space we're calling spiritual space, which is the aspect of reality where self-aware or reflexive minds operate. If so, our choices occurring in the spiritual space of the mental space in which we make our choices determines molecular quantum activity in our brain in the physical space dimension of mental space in the mind of God, which is also in spiritual space. I never said reality wasn't complicated. Further, seeing quantum mechanics in terms of the development of the possibilities of experiences, as, say, Schrödinger's equations describe it, shows that quantum mechanics can be in both halves of a dualist description of mind-brain interaction, since even brain activity itself, like any other quantum constituted object, can now be seen as a matrix of the development of the possibilities of experience, just as all quantum objects can. This matrix of evolving quantum possibilities of observation, that is your brain activity, interacts with the experiences of the mind associated with that brain activity, both by creating the mind in the first place and in free will. To be completist, we might go on to define the structure of changing physical reality in terms of the structure of changing experience. But here the metaphysics would start to get really complicated. So I'll leave exploring the implications of all that to someone else. We have the best reasons to believe there is a God. Being the sort of creator God he is, he knows everything. In his eternal now experience is every event that's ever happened, quantum or otherwise. This includes not only every quantum event there ever will be, real or virtual, but every human and other finite experience ever had. I think God has the imagination to imagine all possibilities from all possible perspectives. I wouldn't assume that he has imagined them all, just that he could. Among physical possibilities, our own quantum universe dwells. In this region of the multiverse of possibilities in the mind of God, these possibilities define our world in specifically quantum ways, making both the material world and the minds in it. Thanks.